You first in Washington, D.C. Before we talk about his election prospects, which are quite honestly a bit dim at this point in the game, but his message has been very different than the other candidates. How has he impacted political discourse when it comes to talking about presidential politics? Go ahead, Brian.
Well, Bernie Sanders defines himself as a democratic socialist. As you know, Peter, and as everybody knows, anti-socialism or anti-communism had become the unofficial religion of the United States since about 1945 with the onset of the Cold War. The fact that someone can speak as a democratic socialist and call for free education, free college education, free health care, and defy the Democratic Party establishment while ranting against Wall Street, and then get hundreds of thousands and then millions of people to support him, including 70 to 80% of the young voters in the Democratic Party primaries. That's an example, really a demonstration that things have changed politically, and that the Sanders campaign has helped be a catalyst for that change. We had the Occupy movement in 2011 in the streets, in the public squares that said, we are the 99%, ranting against the 1%, of course, making the point that poverty is growing, that 1 out of every 2 Americans now lives in poverty or near poverty. Bernie Sanders, in some ways, in many ways, I would say, is an electoral expression of that sentiment that was expressed in the streets in 2011, a sentiment that was suppressed by law enforcement in the United States. And Sanders continues to grow in spite of the fact that the Democratic Party establishment, almost in its totality, has done everything to stop his being elected. Here we are on June 7th in California in other primaries, the very strong possibility that Sanders will continue his winning streak. So the Democratic Party establishment now has a paradox, a dilemma. They're trying to stop Sanders. Sanders is bringing new voters to the polls. Sanders has created extreme enthusiasm. Hillary Clinton has huge negatives because it was her policies, pro-Wall Street neoliberalism, that has created some of this great suffering in America. And so are they going to deny Bernie Sanders a place? And so that's the struggle right now going on in the United States. It's very exciting.
Hank, denying Bernie Sanders a place, I think that's a very interesting statement there. I mean, he does come out with a very different message. And like it or not, Hillary Clinton is quintessentially the establishment candidate here. And as Brian pointed out, she has extreme negatives. As far as I know, she has the strongest recorded negatives of any presidential campaign candidate. So, I mean, where is Bernie Sanders' place in this campaign and in American politics in general? Okay, Brian, if I can go to you, I stand corrected here. I probably shouldn't use the term establishment. I should say the donors. They're the ones that make the decision because they're spending their money on this, and Hillary is their campaign, their candidate because she's going to keep the status quo for them. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, but I think there is an establishment. I think there are donors, and donors are important, but there is a real establishment of political rule. There is a foreign policy consensus. Trump has broken away out of that consensus a little bit, but since the United States became the dominant part of the capitalist world and the dominant empire in the world after 1945, there has been more or less a consensus about how the United States will maintain power. Hillary Clinton is very much a part of that establishment. I mean, she was not only a supporter of the Iraq War, she was the primary cheerleader demanding the war in Libya. She was the one who said laughingly on TV, we came, we saw, he died, about the lynching of the Libyan head of state in the streets. She was demanding the civil war, in the foreign-funded civil war in Syria. She's been a hawk when it comes to Russia and to Eastern Europe. She is really part of the establishment. Bernie Sanders has bad policies, from my point of view, on foreign policy. But what makes this new is that he is tapping into the massive anger against Wall Street, against the neoliberal policies that the Clintons and Wall Street bankers championed, and also championed by George W. Bush. And he's reflecting this groundswell of opposition that exists that's looking for some political voice in the United States.
Okay, this is what happens.
The Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment are trying to stop him.
Okay, Hank, no, I'm sorry. Let me go to Hank because he's been very patient. He wanted to jump in twice. Go ahead, Hank. Go ahead.
There is not much new here in trends in American politics. We have had these populist movements time and time again. They're much more social movements than they are political entities. Well, you have certainly outcomes. The Townsend movement created Social Security, but they couldn't create a political party. The Bernie Sanders phenomena is a constant. We've seen it before. It's not Bernie Sanders this time. It was Upton Sinclair one time. It was the muckrakers before that. This very populist movement that forces change. So the impacts are long-term, maybe. But it all depends who's in charge. And frankly, both parties have an establishment of governance, of people in control, and party leaders historically, and the research is pretty clear.
And it's the same establishment. It's largely the same establishment.
Nominees of those parties are.
Well, it's the same establishment and the same policies.
The Clinton administration, Bill Clinton, he was then president. Hillary was the so-called first lady. In 1998, that deemed that the main policy of the U.S. government was regime change, not weapons control in Iraq. In 1999, they dropped 28,000 bombs and missiles on Yugoslavia. Once she was in as Secretary of State, and before that as U.S. Senator, she was the same hawk demanding the U.S. war, the criminal war in Iraq that took a million lives.
Wait a second.
You've asked what she learned.
Those are real things.
This is the problem.
Was that
Okay, Hillary Clinton is not the captive of the establishment. She is the mouthpiece of the establishment. And she's not like just dragged along as a captive. I mean, she is a willing participant in the wars of aggression that the United States has waged for the past 16 years, 17 years, in fact. Moreover, you look at her speech against Bernie Sanders and her speech before AIPAC, the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, the pro-Israeli lobby. She calls for a militant war against young people on college campuses who are demanding justice for Palestine through the BDS movement. She calls for let's rise up and fight them.
I think we can
take it that
Brian will not be supporting.
The reason Hillary Clinton won the New York State primary, for instance, against Clinton, is you had to register 193 days before the primary. In other words, as a Democrat. Wherever Bernie Sanders can have independents or late registrants, meaning young people, vote for him, he wins. And so the general election is about that. It's not just about the narrow Democratic Party expected electorate. Right now, the polls demonstrably show that Sanders, because he speaks to the deep economic suffering of the people, especially in swing states like Pennsylvania, like Ohio, like Florida, where there's still devastation, and the neoliberal policy of the Clintons has left 1 out of every 2 Americans in poverty or near poverty. Sanders does much better than.
I said it 6 months ago that Donald Trump would be the nominee and that he would be very tough to beat, and that is in fact true. That's not a function of Bernie Sanders. That's a function of economic gaps and people thinking that they can solve a problem by listening to demagoguery. Different issue.
Well, it's not just demagoguery. I have a hard time believing that. I think the pain of people is very, very real. And I think statistically, and all of us here would probably agree, the middle class has been just crushed over the last 40 years. And we've had Republican, Democrat, and that crushing effect continues, okay? And I will express my opinion here, but the 1% has done extremely well, particularly since 2008. Go ahead, Brian, in Washington.
Yeah, I mean, that is the really dominant reality. And you see the trajectory of American politics is also conforming to what's happening in the economy. These are not short-term trends. These are long-term trends. Neoliberal policies inaugurated by the Clintons when they destroyed really the liberal wing of the Democratic Party. The liberals became the L word. You couldn't say it out loud. That neoliberal policy led to mass incarceration, 2.3 million Americans in prison right now, 1 million more in the last 15 years, and also devastating losses for jobs. Wages are down, benefits are gone, pensions are gone, jobs are gone, communities are devastated. This is the problem of Wall Street capitalism having complete control over the Democratic and Republican Party, and the Republican candidates up until now, not Trump necessarily, but certainly the Clintons, the Bushes, and the rest of them, they've been the voice of these policies. They've been the voice of Wall Street.
Okay, Hank, you want to reply to that? Do you disagree, Hank?
Yeah, there is but no question that the dominance of money in politics has changed the entire equation, and there is truth to the fact that the income gap has increased exponentially. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is Bernie Sanders supplies some answers to that. He's not likely to be the president. And again, the things he's talking about may wind up as being policy that gets enacted into law. The system as a means of stabilizing itself. It's called having Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump type show up where the pressure, so the pressure can be taken off the system, and either it does adjust or it does remain in neoliberal context, which we've talked about. Do I think it's going to change this time? The answer is yes, because the system, because the present moment is an extreme one. Why is it so extreme? Then what's the anecdotal example? Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Extremes on the spectrum.
Who can bring change to America, Hank? Who? What candidate in your mind? Who? Hank, who? Who's the candidate that will bring change?
I think anybody gets elected is not going to have much choice.
Okay, so you don't have a candidate in mind.
You want to start? Bill Clinton in 1995, and I was there, talked about making portions of college education tax deductible. That's a way to start, okay?
All right, gentlemen, we've run out of time. We could have talked for much longer, but we're going to have to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests in New York and in Washington, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.
The international agenda today is unforgiving. 2 wars, conflict in the Middle East, ongoing threats of violent extremism and nuclear proliferation, global recession, climate change, hunger and disease, and a widening gap between the rich and the poor. All of these challenges affect America's security and prosperity, and they all threaten global stability and progress.
Greetings, we are anonymous. This is an open message to you, Hillary. We know what you and your people stand for, and we do not forget. It seems lying has become second nature to you, or should I say your only nature. The amount of times you have been caught out is astonishing. You act like you will benefit the human collective, and many believe and blindly support you, but we know your real intentions, your real motives, and your real plans. And we know you are backed by the same dark suits that are behind nearly every other U.S. president. You will not bring about change, at least not in a positive way, and you will remain a puppet, like all of those before you. Remember the 30,000 emails you deleted. Remember the countless times you have lied while under oath. Remember your shady weapon deals that helped arm ISIS, because we remember it all, as we do not forget, and we do not forgive. You may have the public tricked, but we will expose everything. The truth is about to catch up with you. You thought you could hide from your past, but you were wrong.
I think that we have more than met the request from the State Department. The server contains personal communications from my husband and me, and I believe I have met all of my responsibilities, and the server will remain private.
That's interesting. I guess you forgot that it is common knowledge that Mr. Clinton does not use email. So when you say the server contains personal communications from my husband and me, you are straight out lying. And since we are on the subject of Mr. Clinton, let's see what his Secretary of State had to say after his actions killed over 500,000 children.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it? I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
We see through the tricks, the lies, and the games. We see through your psychological tactics, and we see your desire for power, regardless of the consequences. Your Machiavellian behavior, your tendency to manipulate, deceive, and destroy for personal gain, is nothing new. You're master of the black arts of attack politics, as skillfully cloaked in layers of deniability. But when you need money, as all candidates do, your imprudence bewilders even your most loyal supporters. This pattern is a familiar one. Huge amounts of money are raised from political insiders, lobbyists, and special interest groups, but you have a very shifty and corrupt way of going about this. In the summer of 2007 you had to return nearly $900,000 to fundraiser Norman Chu, because it was exposed that this money was made with illegal fundraising tactics. Norman is now under indictment for running a Ponzi scheme. It still amazes us how the media gives you a pass, and pretends none of these things happen, and they accept the Hillary operative line, that it is just old news, and to just move on. You are directly behind so many illegal political fundraising schemes. including donations from the Qatari government, but there are too many to go into right now. We do not want you in power. You will spread negativity to every inch of this planet. The Clinton Foundation was, from the start, a trapdoor for ethics. Now it seems it is also a mirror into Clinton's ethics, judgment, and hypocrisy. We are anonymous. We do not forgive. We do not forget. To all the current and future Zionist puppets in the White House, expect us.